Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is December 10, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure today to be here with Daniel R. Small. Daniel, where are you calling in from?
I'm here in Los Angeles.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being. Um, well, I can only speak from experience, so maybe I'll just start with where I just came from Southeast Asia, and probably the best thing that I've had in my adult life was diving in the Philippines, and that was kind of this idyllic, but also such a kind of I don't know, almost like mind expanding experience. Just the kind of, I mean, all the cliches of what people say, right? The weightlessness of like floating over this kind of alien landscape and all that. I would say, yeah, that's what I would pick for now.
That's good. And you were snorkeling or just
No diving.
diving, just diving into the ocean?
No, scuba diving. Sorry.
Scuba diving. Okay, scuba diving. That's cool. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
great answer. I never got that answer. I haven't scuba dived, but I have done that snorkeling, and it was one of the most memorable things I've ever done. So very good. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Um, Probably books, because I feel like with the kind of information tap of the internet and everything being kind of accessible, yet it kind of condenses information in a way that you're not able to extrapolate from it in the same way that I can when I read. So books for sure.
I like that. You didn't say print and matter. You basically said books. Did you become a reader? One, because your parents told you to. Two, they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
All three actually, and I'll add one other point to that. I think the other big reason why reading, well, at least reading to me in my adult life is so important is just because there's a huge array of information that books still deliver that you can't find on the internet and or whatever, or it's very rarefied or difficult to find on the internet. So it feels like a very linear way to experience that kind of information flow.
Really good point. I love it. Do you, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Um, I think in the same way that it gives a scaffolding for history. I think there's some almost unconscious impulse to create a kind of linearity. I would say like it's both a blessing and a curse though, because the same way that like the kind of modernist myth of like we're all moving towards some kind of inevitable destiny that's on a straight line. I think like the more that history unfolds, especially these days, the more that it of course like folds back on itself and becomes very chaotic and non-linear.
Yeah.
um yeah.
Does this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
um I think there is something innate within humans that some sort of drive that pushes us in that direction. I was actually talking to a guy who studies the origins of language, and he makes a really interesting point about how like the first language was like this Khoisan, or allegedly this language called Khoisan, that is this clicking language that was really the first like time in human history where we had the biology or the physiobiological capability of creating a sound. And I think there's something really interesting because, like, within that spectrum of this Khoisan language, there's also many like animal languages that are on the same kind of plane, like sperm whales or other creatures like that, that also use this kind of almost like, or what we perceive as being kind of like a clicking language. And so yeah, I'm very interested in that trajectory, I guess, of the potential that all species, all intelligence, is following some sort of ancient directive.
It's really good, Daniel. You know, this woman, Carolyn Casey, taught on the radio for 20 years on Pacifica, taught me that, talks about this word. She got it from someone else, I forgot. Biomimicry. So did we hear birds whistling and then we went, whoa, we could do that? Or did we start whistling and then we say, hey, those creatures do it too? There's no way we can tell, but like we see the biomimicry best example. Well, one of the good examples is Velcro. The guy who invented Velcro saw that there was this plant that went and he pulled it apart. And it's like, oh, I can make that synthetically,
Right. Totally. It's actually, it's very much in the ether for me these days, because like it goes to like even like the kind of macro version of what I think you're talking about is like this kind of looming question about whether or not, I mean, it's like the most age-old question about humans' existence in a lot of ways in our relationship to the natural world, but like, whether or not we essentially like impose a certain taxonomic structure on everything that we've come to know, or whether or not we discover it, like, do we discover that the world in those terms? And I think it's such an interesting question that, of course, there's not really an answer to, but an endlessly fascinating kind of thought experiment.
Yeah, that's John Cage. That's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
They can. I guess, I mean, well, as a philosophical answer, I would say yes. I mean, every thought creates some sort of emotional input or comes from some place. So I would say yes.
Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
have a certain illumination about that thing. I guess it depends on how specific or kind of obtuse we're talking about, but I feel like, like, I think that the structure, or like say a kind of epistemological structure, is what I always think about, even on my like micro level of like how I interface with the world. So I feel like, I have my own kind of hierarchy or way of, constructing meaning from experience. And so like, I think, having certain experiences, having certain illuminations about those experiences is how I come to, to know.
Good. Yeah. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. Can humans? Oh, go ahead.
But one other point though, then, Wittgenstein also says, that like the limits of language are the limits of my world. So it's kind of like there's a lot outside of what you can say in speech that exists that we're just not able to come to know yet.
Yeah. Well, you got ESP. The next question is, can humans think without language?
No, absolutely not.
I love it. Do you know 80 to 90% people say yes?
I mean,
but I'm just saying, I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong. I'm joyous when people answer not what everybody says in general. My questions are sort of almost like a survey. I can tell how there's a consistency with a lot of these, and I rejoice when someone says no. So yeah, go ahead, explain. I'm curious.
I think language tethers us to everything we've ever come to know. I mean it's a big part of like the film that I'm working on currently about this effort to revise the Voyager Golden Record and all the problems that brings up about language and how, is there a possibility that, say, we are able to think outside of language, think outside of our own anthropocentric bias, which, language is probably the biggest part of our anthropocentric bias and what tethers us to each other. So yeah, I think it's almost impossible to not think in language. Even when you're dreaming, you're still thinking in language, it's still always with you. It's a kind of, it is its own thought virus, it permeates everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's if you read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people, it isn't a description of a dream. It is a dream. It is like you're on a psychedelic experience or a mind altering experience if you can get into that groove, because it's language about language. But you
Right.
can't, it's the American Indians, indigenous, have this thing. They're the co-creator of the dream. So they go from tent to tent and they go, "Oh, well, Daniel, what did you dream last night?" And then you start saying, "Well, there was a pup tent on the edge of a canoe." And then I ask you the next question, and I'm the co-creator of your dream, because you can't really put your dream into words, but we think we could because we invented words.
Right. 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 Yeah, I think it's impossible in my mind to imagine anything that can't be and that isn't put into the structure or the hierarchy of language, regardless of what language it may even be,
Yeah.
or even if it's a made up language.
Yeah. It's good, Daniel. You really get this, and I really appreciate how articulate you are. I appreciate this a lot. Okay, so Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
I mean, I think just in the same way that we know that, say, like, images are replacing language, but they're also kind of interchangeable with language in certain ways, or at least we perceive them as being like that. So, I mean, my answer to your question is, I think images supplement language, but I also think that there's a very strange dynamic now where it's like images are, or everything is depicted instead of being written in a kind of linear form, and it's also what creates this kind of era that I believe that we're in now, where everything relates to everything else. Just like when you look at a photograph, the kind of chain of causality within that image, everything relates to everything else within it. In language, you don't have that elasticity, but with images, you very much do. And I think that's why I also gravitate towards images, because there's such an amazing kind of ambiguity written into them that's difficult to pin into language in some ways.
It's good. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
More feeling.
Yeah.
I
These
think
are,
absolutely.
yeah. Well, I love Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. It's like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? But, most people I say, are we more feeling or thinking? They go, I think we're more feeling. So, we invented the words. Can you really separate feeling from thought? Uh, because we invented the words, we think we can.
Yeah, I think, well, there's also this whole other like spectrum of just like sensation. And I think like having sex or whatever, doing something that feels very primal or something that you perceive yourself as not thinking, it's a pure sensation, even though you are still thinking.
Yeah,
You're just you're divorced from it to a degree that you're not used to, so you define it as that, you know.
that's it. You define it. Great word, because that's like people who meditate, they go, think about not thinking.
Right, right, right.
Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
Um, I don't think it has to be. I think it is in the context of how us humans have defined or would like to have defined ourselves. I think it. I. I. I think honestly, it's that weird kind of line. I mean, this question is kind of in between this weird line between like, say, the way that like animist cultures view animals or trees or other living beings, and that humans are just a part of that, that web or that chain. And I think the more that we find out, both in the most modern context in science, the more that we find out that that assumption, that idea is essentially true. It's difficult to disprove it.
Yeah. Second Turing question, can machines think?
Um, I think that they can, but I also think that um, I think that I think that the way that machines think is like a proxy for how we think. I don't know if I don't know if it's like right on the nose. Like when we say think, it means that a machine thinks, or computes in the same way that we think. But I think it can certainly be a proxy. I mean, we already have that now, with whatever, But I think the big illusion about that, at least again, just to address the elephant in the room of like, what is happening today with AI and everything. To me, it's not the issue of like, the science fiction kind of like the machines are smarter than the humans, they're taking over, whatever. It's actually kind of almost the opposite. It's that like the way that we perceive what machines are doing is that like the biggest illusion. And really the machines are not incredibly smart. They're quite stupid right now. I think if anything, the headline to me or the story is that like it's our perception of that that we buy in, right? That we buy into this supposed affectivity of when GPT 3 or 4 or whatever like writes something that it has meaning. Um, it has meaning to us, but what's actually going on is something far less than thinking, or what is really happening within our brains.
Really agree. I heard a guy on Pacifica Caller the other day go, AI is in its infant stage, and it's our responsibility as like parenting to raise it well. So,
Yeah, I agree.
get over it. It ain't, it's okay. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
um in my current life, I would like to say I pursue both equally. I think the older that I get, the more that I lean more or into the idea of happiness, um, and less into the idea of like a certain kind of martyrdom for some cause that like when in my earlier years I would have been like, of course I have to do this or that or go through this whole process to somehow understand this. I think I don't know. It goes back and forth though. It's like it's weird in some ways because like moving between like being an artist and being a filmmaker, which are I guess one and the same, but like um, the more I move into that, the more I do gravitate towards experience that allows or gives some kind of meaning. But I think more and more in my personal life, it's like maybe it's also just that hangover from the pandemic where you're just like, yeah, I need to get that like injection of happiness every day, like so it's a bit of both.
Yeah. I got it from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book. He says basically happiness tends to not last and meaning does tend to last. So, um, does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
I think that in the early days of human life on this earth, I think it was detecting it. And I think today we're more creating it because I think we've built a certain infrastructure of information and knowledge and history around us. And the more that we kind of, unpack that, the more that we are the authors of it too. We're not actually reflecting on it. We are entangled in it.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Speed of light.
The poet Audre Lorde said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
I am a believer, but I'm not, well, I'm a believer in, like, just like everyone will be forced to be anyways, in, the technological trajectory of wherever we're headed. Um, I think that, like you said earlier, it's going to take a lot of refining and kind of molding to make it something that resembles something more of a kind of humanist ideological positioning. But I think the tool that I think about the most is, like, how, say, time-based media will be changed or reinterpolated as a new medium because of AI and because of these different tools. Where, like, one of the biggest issues I think in, like, historical consciousness has always been this issue of course, like, authenticity, or what is real and what is fake, and what's pretending to be what or what isn't. And I think that entire kind of history is going to be changed, just like I think copyright will be completely changed. I mean, how could it not? It's already happening. It's just that, of course, as everyone is well aware, like, the politics and the laws around these things are just so woefully in the past, we can't even figure out how to, like, regulate the internet or whatever. These things that have been with us for 30 some years. And so I think, like, the tools of the future to me are going to be, um, you know, uh, there's going to be a lot more masquerading than there is, this kind of stream of authorship.
Really good. You evoked two quotes. Oscar Wilde said, "Everything's in public domain." And then Duchamp said, "The artists of the future will only have to point."
I
Duh,
agree.
that's it.
I mean, even Hitchcock talked about, at a certain point, like, they'll be, sometime in the future, they'll be able to just, like, film as a medium will just be like, you hit a button and it basically manipulates your brain to have a certain sensation or feeling. And, while I think, of course, that's, like, a very kind of pessimistic lens in which to view it, it's probably not that far off,
Hitchcock, Anne McLuhan's favorite joke was two goats were eating film coming out of a film can, like over here in Culver City in the back lot. And one goat turns to the other and goes, "The book was better."
That's great. Love it.
What new toy do you suggest?
Um, like a literal toy for children, or
You
just
you put all of these into the context you want, so you can make it literal or metaphorical. I mean, yeah, toy. That's funny because, see, I kept asking people, "What new tool do you suggest?" And one person eventually says, well, I can suggest a toy. So now I just piggyback it and say toy after tool, you know.
I honestly, I don't know if I have a great answer for what new toy. I mean, um, I pass.
That's all
I'm not
right.
sure.
There's no pressure. That's the beauty. It's saying I don't know or I can't answer is totally okay. No worries at all. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Um, I worry, I think, in a very collective way that, you know, we're like humans are marching towards some uh, definitive future that we think that we foresee, or that we've predicted or set ourselves up to reach some final position or point. But I think the kind of melancholic thing about our time is that it's like, as we always kind of reach towards this inevitable future, or whatever we think of as an inevitable future, the past still hasn't caught up to the present, and that this kind of temporal confusion has led to a lot of, you know, horrific things happening, and one could very easily see how more horrific things are on the way, when again it seems like we're always kind of, at best, maybe recycling the past into the present, but we never quite reach the future, right? We're just kind of endlessly in this like cyclical way of framing things, but never able to actually reach that, whatever, again, kind of idea of the inevitable future.
Really good. You know, your film Future Continuous really caused me to have a major epiphany watching that this morning, because I'd like to ask you about the word archive. And the basic two questions is archiving more innate or more invented? And then, do you have a plan for your archive? So let me set it up, because I want to draw the line from what you just said. The past is not caught up to the present. So this is Norman Klein in your film quoting Baudelaire. Try the statement, no, try to make the statement, I left the verb out. Long, deep, and rich. Uh, it will be it will age very fast. So
Right.
yeah, he says this thing, it will age very fast. Try to make a statement. I don't know what the verb was. Then he said, if you try to only own the day you're talking, it will last forever. So the second part of that, him pulling this out, sort of interpreting what Baudelaire said, reminds me of Ram Dass saying, be here now, live in the present. But the way he says it, try to only own the day you're talking. I mean, that feels like be here now to me. You know, own that day, own the present, and that will last forever. So this is, both James Joyce and Frank Zappa said, all times are happening now. And Wyndham Lewis, the kind of alternate of Joyce, said, the artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. Now that sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but yeah, I don't want to even like to say elitist. Well, everybody can live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. And so the Egyptians would put stuff in their coffin with them when they die. So was this a form of archiving? So if you go to the etymology of the word archive, in 1400s, it meant keep safe, free from harm. Then the 1600s, it was what we kind of know it as records or documents preserved as evidence. And then it goes into the Greek town hall, public building. So, you know, why would we want to, it's evident. Why would we want to save stuff if we're supposed to live in the present? Oh, because we're going to learn, like the future said, destroy all the libraries and in the museums. I'm like, right on. And you can't. I mean, I live in a library. I go to the library every day. I mean, I love that they were able to say that. But basically, you tackled so much with saying the past is not caught up to the present in the background of our present research in this word archiving. So sorry to go on, but it's basically, is archiving more innate or more invented?
I think it's more innate. I think even in its kind of primordial state of what you just mentioned, that kind of cross section of the history of, it was kind of like a keepsake or something in the past, and then along that timeline you keep going down it, and it becomes more and more like a kind of record or a history that's trying to be preserved. I think it's innate, and I think if anything, my interest in it as an artist and as a filmmaker, I think to add to what Norman was saying and what I was saying earlier, I think that is in many ways, like the definition of, in some ways, what artists really do today is they're constantly kind of interrogating, the past and reinterpolating it for the present, and it's that act or that kind of progression that then gives new inputs for speculative futures, and so I think that there really is a whole timeline in that too, that I think is very much a part of like the role that artists take on in certain ways, to basically kind of map this whole, yeah, I mean, to map and to remap what is the given,
That you sort of, would you agree with Wyndham Lewis? The artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. I mean, is that sort of what you just said, or different?
I feel like it's slightly different in that I think that instead of writing, a detailed kind of report on what the future will be, they reimagine the past so that input on the future will have a different output, and so it kind of becomes this, yeah, it becomes this kind of looping timeline again, like I was saying earlier, where one thing kind of has this input, the other has this output on it, and it's really like it's really like the artist, like boiled down to its kind of essence, seems like it's really an interrogation of like the temporality that we live within, and that we try to reinvent or reimagine to eventually reach the future.
Yeah, really good. And so, if you died tomorrow, do you have someone who's going to take care of your archives? Do you have a plan for your archives, or are you already archived?
I have, I guess you can't see, it's on the other side of my studio, but yeah, I already have like a quite large archive, and I don't have like a definitive plan, although there's like the legal side of, like writing out who it goes to and what powers that be like take over or whatever. But I honestly haven't thought that far into what is the exact kind of future for my own archive, other than it's a living, working archive that continues to be added to.
Yeah. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Daniel, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think it's like the paradox of existence in some ways. It's the this kind of like simultaneous love and loathing for the tools that allow us to, to propagate certain messages and have them go out into the world. And I think artists are, of course, because we live in the culture too, are no different than anyone else in that there are certain givens that must be kind of articulated through, and so we're left with the same tools that anyone is left with, which is of course also maybe brings it into a whole other realm about the definition of what artists even are, and how that definition changes as everyone has a YouTube channel and everyone has a social media and everyone has all these tools.
Yeah. Do artists have moral obligation?
I think they do. Absolutely, I think they do. But I think one of the issues I see of our era that is troubling to me about the kind of trajectory of what artists, or at least the claim of what artists do today, is the overextending of, say, or living in the shadow of like the ethical code of something without allowing there to ever be ambiguity. I think that's actually, if anything, one of the greatest tools that artists, musicians, filmmakers, whatever, have. And to open something up to be considered in a different way, instead of a kind of didactic lecture about what to, a directive that tells you do this or do that, or believe this or believe that. I think like that's the magic of it, or to me it is, and so
Yeah.
I think there's a missed opportunity in making it more and more heavy-handed, more and more kind of didactic.
Yeah, Mallarmé said, I don't explain, I explore. So here's two just quick quotes about art. I'm curious your reaction. Mike Kelly, art is making your problems other people's problems.
Art is making your problem. I mean, yes and no. It depends on who we're talking about, I guess. I mean, certainly it in some ways is that kind of passing of the torch with for your own problems, I guess. But it's also a tool of rendering, right? A tool of
Yeah.
like rendering a kind of image, or even a kind of thought mapping that hopefully somewhere within there, that there is an actual illumination about it. It isn't just merely the objective passing of your problems or your kind of neuroses onto another group.
Here's a poet, Fanny Howe. The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
Wait, can you read it one more time?
Yep. The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
I agree with that. I
Yeah.
agree with that. Of the kind of, yeah, I mean, I think of course, like in any kind of cosmic context, I mean, that's like the number one headline that humans should take away from it. I think, just the minuscule nature of how kind of insignificant we really are, which again, kind of paradoxically leads you to the conclusion that, wow, it really is incredibly unique, incredibly special that we get to experience the array of what we get to surround ourselves with all the time. And despite all the fraught, problems that humans, create and continue to create, it's also amazing and quite beautiful.
Really well put. Thank you. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I think more afraid of old ideas. I think I'm more afraid. Actually, there's some nuance to that. More afraid of old ideas being recycled into being new ideas.
That's exactly the roots of this question. the guy who invented the intermittent windshield wiper, Charles
Oh yeah.
Kettleman. He said, people are very open-minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old ones. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yeah, I can remember as a child. I remember standing. I was probably 4. I think I was 4. Standing on my driveway, and it was at a time when the neighborhood that I lived in was quite kind of wild and undeveloped. And I just remember standing and watching this like fox like run through this tall grass and just be. It was kind of maybe potentially one of the first times I was kind of just like on my own. Like my parents weren't around. I was just like kind of off on my own, and just being completely amazed, and it really stuck with me.
Wow. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Um, I think it's a curse, both personally and collectively. I think I think it um, because we always choose the way that we remember things, not necessarily the way that they happened, and that is true. I mean, both individually and collectively we do that. So I think that's why it kind of becomes a curse. Because it's never you never see things for what they are. You always see them for what you perceive them as being as they happened to you.
Tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Um, well, so within my family and outside of it.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, my mother had an enormous impact on me. I think, just in part, I think she was, and she is, an extremely critical in her thinking, and also I think helped to basically organize my ideas even from a very early age. She was like a brutal editor, and so I would write things and she would just, cross everything out and basically say to start over again. And but I think, she always used to say like good writing is good thinking. And I think that is extremely true of, well, I think it's true just on its own, but it's also very true in my own kind of background, that I really do believe that impact that she had on me was immense in, like just basically like channeling a certain way of thinking, um, that 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 gave me the structure or the scaffolding to, to think and create bigger ideas than what I would have been capable of otherwise. I think outside of my family, probably a professor that I had when I was at Rhode Island School of Design, named Stephen Apicella Hitchcock, who was also extremely critical. But I feel like I learned more from him about just like the conceptual underpinnings of life, essentially, than I learned from almost anything else, including my own experiences in some ways. And I'm still very close with him. I think he also opened my eyes. Like I think a lot of people who were in my class at RISD really opened our eyes to essentially like what contemporary art could be, and that it isn't just kind of like riffing off of like the greatest hits of contemporary art or whatever, but actually like almost like intervening in something which I think is much different, a different kind of syntax than just kind of making things that look like other things that look like contemporary art.
Yeah. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Not really. They kind of allowed my sister and I to essentially kind of, you know, uh, choose our own adventure. I think, I mean, they are Christian, but I would say a pretty open-ended or kind of liberal version of it, in that it wasn't heavy-handed. It was never kind of enforced. It was, you know, something that was discussed and was like, you know, but I think the very questioning of it was something that they were engaged with as well, which is what made it like a very I don't know, much more supportive than I think at least some of my friends, who I think it really was quite heavy-handed and quite, you know, like regimented, and something that even, you know, that to this day I think I really kind of cringe at when I think about.
Do you pray?
No, not really. There's an impulse to in certain instances in life. I think everyone probably has that. You know, some kind of impulse that moves them in that direction. But um, yeah, I think it's more like a you know, like a very personalized thing that, of course, you know, you kind of put your intent out into the world, not in a mystical way, but you know, but more in a like, you know, you have this living, breathing, feeling relationship with other people, with other living things, and you know, and so I don't know, I can't exactly describe it other than it. I feel like there's definitely a kind of transmutation of forms or ideas that you know, you feel in some sort of communion with something
Yeah,
greater than yourself, which I think is, you know, scientifically proven that is within all of us, you know.
yeah. If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Um, that's very difficult to say because I don't know that my kind of input and journey, well, it certainly is far from complete, but I would just say, yeah, well, if I had to choose something, I guess I would just hope that, you know, whatever my kind of input, both personal and professional, like, you know, by making art, making films, whatever, that those things opened other people up to a range of other experiences or other ways of framing themselves and the kind of collective, um, and and that and that through that it perhaps helped someone, or help some kind of collective reckoning with our own history, or our own kind of ethics.
Yeah. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think there are evil people. I but I think I maybe believe in both. I think there are evil people that I think evil possesses them, and you know, perpetrate certain things. I think that I don't know. I think possession is very real to me in certain ways. Um, yeah, I think that there are certain instances, you know, that are kind of, well, I guess that are somewhat unquantifiable to me, but I think that there are certainly instances where evil has, you know, like reared its head in a certain way and made me kind of acutely aware of it.
Yeah, the hidden question really is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. It's a lot of thoughts. A basic question, Daniel, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I completely agree with Alan Watts. I would say a great case study in that is like if you watch CNN, you know, like there's this constant obsession with like what is Donald Trump doing? What terrible deed has he done recently? And it's fuel being thrown on the fire, right? It amplifies everything that he's doing, and so it it feels so antithetical to the point of just like the more that you kind of enter into, get into the weeds with this guy, it's like the more that you're just amplifying every stupid thing that he says, or going into this kind of ridiculous, point for point, counterpoint for counter. It's just like, just stop. Just don't. Everything about that to me is a case study, and like you're giving airtime to this guy. It's like just move on. Like just find other topic. Like find a leader. Like to
Yeah.
me that seems like just such a sad and kind of pathetic like way of operating when like for instance, for every kind of counterpoint or whatever you want to say, for every terrible deed or whatever that he's done, it's kind of like the actual effect of that, like if you quantify it down to what actually happens when that happens, it's like, well, if anything, what happens is hundreds of millions of dollars pour into the campaign every single time there's like a pushback on whatever, and it's like that is exactly what you don't want to do, like, so
Right.
yeah.
Well, just on Trump for a second, I've been asking this question for about a year. If Trump gets thrown in jail, he cannot run for president. He writes a book and says, I was wrong. I made mistakes and I did wrong. I'm sorry. Would you forgive him?
No.
That's what everybody says. It's amazing. Okay. But it goes like this. There's a Nassim Taleb quote. Games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. My friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, says if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? There's a lot of prompts there, but the bottom line question is, does punishment work?
um I would say by and large it usually doesn't, especially with certain individuals, right? I mean, I think, yeah, I would say that punishment is conditional. It's only relational. It only shares a relation to an outcome when the individual who's being punished has the will, or knows that there is such an insurmountable punishment in front of them that it deters them from doing something again. I don't think it's necessarily that punishment actually works. I think it's that punishment is it's like this scale, right? Like on one side of the scale, there's like, the deed that you did. And then on the other side, there's the punishment, but the punishment is relational to the deed. And like, if it actually is, so severe, so harsh, then of course it'll stop someone from doing something. But does that mean that punishment works? I, I don't necessarily think so. I mean, it's obviously there's a deeper kind of like philosophy, like kind of buried in there. But I think that punishment is conditional. Um, it's never absolute.
I like you differentiating conditional and relational. That's really good for me. And James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
That's great. I think this is one of the great questions at the center of a lot of my work. I think, like, why is there something more real in illusion than there is in reality? I think it's
Yeah.
because we need that illusion to constitute reality,
Yep.
and I think it's a kind of exorcism, of ourselves. It's a way, it's a tool, really, that allows us to find a certain reality or illumination that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, really good. So, walk us through your tipping point. Is your mom and dad taking you to art galleries and museums growing up, and you're forming an aesthetic? Did you study art in high school and then in college? And then where did you go? Oh, and I know your idea or your thoughts on the word artist, but your calling in life, whether you want to call it being an artist, filmmaker, your calling, where was that tipping point where you going, that's what I'm going to pursue?
I would say the tipping point, I was probably, I don't know, I want to say maybe 11 or 12. And I lived in a neighborhood down the street from me, maybe 4 or 5 houses down. There was a guy who he was in this band. I would go down and listen to them play and practice or whatever. And he was also really, really beautiful at drawing. And so I remember just like watching him draw and looking at some of his work and thinking like, wow, that's really amazing. And I kind of knew his brother originally. So I started talking to this other guy, and uh, you know, became really interested in his art and his music and everything, and kind of asked him like, where, like, what was he showing this work or whatever. And he had auditioned for an arts high school in my hometown and gotten into the visual arts program, and then basically encouraged me. He was like, yeah, you should apply when you're old enough to do that. And so I did, and I got into the program. And yeah, it was amazing because actually this program is called Harrison Arts Center, and it basically ran out of a local museum. So like every day for school, like in high school, like I went to the top floor of like a local museum, where I have my studio and everything. And then the other half of the day, like I took like normal classes at the high school. But I would say, yeah, I mean, those two things happening, I mean, absolutely changed the entire kind of trajectory of my life.
So, a screenwriting teacher told me a great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're making your art?
I would I would agree more with on the side of what Kubrick thinks. I think because I think intent is a drive to create structure. It's not necessarily like an endpoint or an output, And I think that's what he's saying there. I've read, many interviews with him, but yeah, I feel like that's for sure like at the heart of what I'm into, where it is more ambiguous in that way. It leads you down a path that opens up new paths. It doesn't close them off. I think the more that intent just becomes like in end to its own means, the less interesting things can become, because they're deterministic, right? It kind of, one thing follows the other, and if you're putting it on the scale of, um, you know, like the more that you see the intent in the final product, like the better it is, then I would just say, then it becomes more like a science fair experiment or something. It's just like, it seems way more kind of like pinned down. Whereas I think intent, intent can itself be ambiguous or open ended, and be more of an invitation to create meaning instead of a lecture about meaning.
Yeah. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your potential viewer when you make your film? When you make your art, how much are you thinking of your,
Well,
yeah.
yeah. I think film is, even though it's similar and shares a lot of things with like making an artwork, it's still very different. So like when I make an artwork, or what I would say, okay, this is going to go be shown in a gallery or whatever, it's very different than like a film. I think with film, I think there is a much greater kind of acute awareness of, like, because there is, of course, there's kind of conventions and structures, and even if you're defying all of the structures and conventions that are within it, that itself is still a structure, right? And so I think my interest in, or I'm sorry, my intent in film is, I think, much more directive, much more heavy-handed itself, than it is with making an artwork, because I think you're investigating or interrogating certain conventions as much as you're giving a narrative structure to forms. And so I think that to me is really like uh, the big difference between, again, like making an artwork and making a film, because no matter how many ways you slice it, there's still a beginning and there's still an end. Like there's no other way. Or at least that's how we do it now. So um,
Yeah, it was good. I sort of jumped there because the question should apply to your art and then your film. But let's go into film a little, because this question applies. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid. Maybe even non-tangible, like religion or philosophy, extends consciousness. What does the moving image camera extend for you? What humanness?
I think form is narrative, and narrative in the context of a moving image is, I think, to me, probably, at least personally, the best and most kind of potent art form, because it has even though it has probably the most structure to it. There's a template, or again, a beginning and an end. There's a lot more elasticity to play with within it in some ways. I mean, obviously, you make a sculpture, the object can be read from any angle, like, you can do all kinds of things, create other sensory experiences with it, all that. But I think there's something about film and something about our we have a certain innate desire about film, because I think we get a sense that it narrates something beyond us to us. And I think that's why, even though there may be other potentials in other, again, to tap into other sensory structures or whatever within art, I think film gives, again, this greater kind of elasticity.
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of people say film extends memory or extends your eye. McLuhan said the film extends your foot because you travel. But you said a lot there. In this is Hollis Frampton, the experimental filmmaker, said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
I think you can. I mean, I think certain people live in that state of I don't know, not ignorance, but kind of bliss beyond that, or whatever, that whatever that beyond constitutes. Um, yeah,
Good. McLuhan also said there's no such thing as a good or a bad movie. It's a good or a bad viewing experience. Any comment?
I know where he's coming from when he says that, and I think that's really funny. I think it's really funny because like it's like it's like today, like you could sit down and watch like some trash TV or whatever, and it doesn't necessarily tell you anything other than you're watching it as an anthropologist, right? Like you watch it to understand or to have this other kind of experience, and to understand like the the range of what certain media can do. Um, so I totally get what he's saying. I mean, I think, of course, are there bad films or bad media that have been made? Of course. What McLuhan's saying, though, I think, that idea is like, yeah, I do that all the time. And it's like, it's like sitting on a plane for 14 hours 2 days ago and like watched every blockbuster that's come out in the last like few years. And I mean, they're all pretty terrible, but I mean, as I mean, from my perspective, but it tells you something more.
Oh,
Its narration isn't what's on screen. There's a subtext to what's also being narrated to you through watching it, and that's what I watch those things for.
yeah. It's amazing the film experience for so many like us is on the plane. Yeah, I don't watch. Well, anyways, I was my niece was watching a stupid TV show once, and I says, "Why are you watching this?" And she goes, "Because nothing else is on." And people go, "Well, that's stupid." I says, "No, that's a perfect example of what McLuhan's talking about because she decided to chill out on the couch and just be, sort of relaxed. So it doesn't
Right,
matter what's on the TV. It's the ritual of it's like people who fish, same thing. They're not necessarily want to catch a fish. They just want to have an excuse to sit alongside the lake and stare at the water, you
right,
know.
right. Yeah, it's the ritual experience itself. It isn't necessarily the content of that experience.
Yeah. This is Peter Greenaway saying cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? If me and you watch The Flicker by Tony Conrad, for 15 minutes, just flickering black and white, a story might go through our heads, but it's not really storytelling per se. So, just any comments on this? Cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers.
I totally agree. He actually said that when I saw him here in Los Angeles, when he I think he screwed his head in two knots here. But anyways, yeah, I totally agree with him. I mean, obviously, cinema, and I mean, there's cinema, but then there's time-based media, right? And I think maybe what he's also referring to is like, time-based media. Of course, there's an entire horizon, an entire spectrum that has barely been touched by most, because there's no money in producing things like that. But of course, there's a whole again, like horizon of media that hasn't been really um, interrogated or investigated as being just as interesting and just as important as the core like storytelling. I will say I take a little bit of an issue with what he said, though, in that, like, I think I probably said this already in this interview, but uh, I do believe, and I used to tell all my students the same thing, that like if you have form, though, you have narrative. There's no form that
Yeah.
just appears from nothing. Everything is related to everything else,
Yeah.
and So I think even if you're watching, the flickering of a screen or like 1970s video art or whatever, I mean, they're still formed. So there still is a narrative there, even if it's devoid of the narratives that we're used to.
Yeah. Andrew Noren said the exact thing, Daniel. It's amazing. Because he said, if you put one frame after another, that is narrative. If it's a bunch of gobbledygook, abstract, it's still one frame after another.
Right.
So this is along that line. What's the services and disservices of ghettoizing experimental film and or just art in general? Even though it's this big market, most normal people think art is bullshit. It's like a bunch of rich people jerking off. And so
Right.
Jackson Pollock was on the cover of Life magazine in 49. Regular people could start forming an aesthetic on experimental painting. Bruce Conner and Maya Darwin weren't on the cover of Life magazines. This is a biased statement, but generally it's a lot of rich art kids or privileged, entitled kids who develop an avant-garde aesthetic and dominate the experimental film world or dominate the art world. Any comment?
I agree. I think, just like with all things today, you follow the money, and like, is there money in making these radical things? I think, in some ways there's some resurgences that you have or little blips, here and there, but by and large, I mean, I think like your example of like, the kind of whatever, I'm sure, uh, in the early days, say dismissal of someone like Pollock, but then as soon as like there's a market and there's people built into it, and you're on the cover of the newspaper or
Yeah.
magazines or whatever, then all of a sudden, of course, there's a market. Now there's money flowing into it. Um, so it's that problem of always like the most probably intriguing and kind of radical things end up being co-opted by like whatever, like in today's terms it's like like the form of the art fair or something, which is just like this kind of circus or whatever.
Yeah.
And but is for the one percenters to go kind of, it's almost like trading baseball cards or something, and so I don't know, but I also think that part, at least in my vision, I think that part of the art world, while I think it'll always be there, I think more and more, even though of course like it gets all this hype and everybody talks about it all the time, it becomes more and more its own kind of boutique market, and it's kind of, it silos itself, like there's so many other things going on now, especially I think with all these different emergent technologies,
Yeah.
and how it's going to change, I think, film and image making, and I mean everything, writing. I think that there's a lot that's happening that, of course, that boutique world is completely living in ignorance of, because they just want things to continue as they've always been, and they maybe will get their wish, that it will just continue as things have always been. But I think it's like when people talk about the art world, it's like there's many art worlds, right? There's like
Yeah.
the predominant one that people talk about in the New York Times. Then there's like 500 others.
Yeah. Really good point, Daniel, because I was going to say, Mike Kelly said, art is the last bastion where you can practically be free. And it was probably because he came right out of Warhol and McLuhan, who both said art is anything you can get away with. And when I said that to my friend, he says, that sounds like Trump. So I talked to Michael Apted 40 years ago, film director, and I says, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished in the 80s because of MTV, to the point where Marty Scorsese said, I cut my films faster because of MTV.
Right.
So I asked this question with a bias. Oh, no. Well, first of all, Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. So I asked this question with a bias. Can we really learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I think we're brainwashed to believe we can. I think that I think humans, like there are limits and there are possibilities to like who we are as a species.
Yeah.
And I think the limits are things that we're constantly trying to push beyond, and the possibilities we largely ignore
Yeah.
because as of right now there's no money in them, or we perceive them as being, there's no industry we can like build around them. But
Yeah.
I think yeah, I think we, I think there's even been, studies that have been done about, just the kind of rapid succession, rapid kind of pace at which information and whatever the incoming, that all humans kind of take in, at least in some version of the modern world, that, it's obviously changed our kind of neurobiological structure. But it's also, I think, I do believe we're reaching a point where the limits of what we're capable of taking on, or being able to metabolize, has completely been is completely like it like is basically not able to catch up with where we are. And so we're just kind of woefully like, trying to like we were talking about earlier, trying to like reach for this future. But I think it's so weird because in some ways, like, or in many ways, like, the future that we're reaching for, we're also the authors of. It's not necessarily that like it's some like godsend future. It's one that we've created the trajectory that we're on, and there really is no going back to like some simpler time or whatever. But we also know that like we're not able to catch up to where we even are now. I mean, like this same topic comes up all the time about like, are we capable of, say, generating like a new language that would be, say, more universal to us, but
Yeah.
universal beyond us too. And it's kind of this impossibility. There's actually this really interesting author I've been reading, Andrea Moro, who talks about this limit of like, we're just not capable, and so we have to try to imagine possibilities beyond ourselves,
Yeah.
which I think is a big part of progress or the future or any kind of conception of the future.
Yeah.
But we also are live in kind of blissful ignorance that there's nothing more anyways, so we're kind of just not even able to conceptualize that there's something beyond it to start with.
Yeah. Really well put. In that, is that Andre Morrow, Morrow?
Yeah, Moro. He wrote a book called Impossible Languages.
Very good. Thank you for telling me about that. And really evoked a lot there because there's a great song. It says, if you don't have dreams, your dreams can't come true. And Umberto Eco said, yeah, you're standing on the shoulders so you can try to look farther, and it's even Harold Bloom says you absorb your influence, then you abandon them. So, it's so much regurgitation.
Right.
But you said so much there really got me. McLuhan said the future ain't what it used to be. And he actually updated the medium as massage mid-career and changed it to the user is the content. But I'm curious, just to go back to that, is multitasking literally possible?
I mean, I think there are divisions that we could do better at, extrapolating from different things all happening simultaneously. But as far as what I was saying earlier about the limits, or like how do we find those limits of,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've already found them. I think that's kind of the unfortunate thing. I think we found it in many ways. I think many of the like polemical topics that endlessly get kind of talked about in Congress and get talked about in the UN and, you know, and in the newspaper every day if you read it. Like, those are the limits. It
Yeah.
feels, you know, because like a lot of these things we've already found the limits, say maybe many years ago, you know, like a
Yeah.
lot of the same things are just keep coming up for review again and again and again. And it's kind of like, you know, maybe our species just, I mean, it is a pessimistic view, but
Yeah.
maybe our species just isn't there. We're just not capable of getting there. Because if you take, again, like case studies like language, and there's definitive ways of saying like we're not capable of creating a more universal language. We can try through math, we can try through science, we can try through the linguistic means we've already created, but we're not able to actually synthesize it into something that could be, again, more universal. Maybe there, I don't believe there's anything that is truly universal anyways, but say more universal.
Yeah.
um, and then you apply that to, again, like the idea that if language is in large part, you know, like it's the limits of our world, it's the
Yeah.
limits of what we can know, then how do we ever go beyond what we can't even articulate?
Yeah. I'm researching a a phenomenon right now, and it's Maria Gambudis, the anthropologist from UCLA, said there were cultures that had no warfare, and this was goddess culture in you know, matriarchy. And most people go, no, we have to have that war. That war was justified. And you know, humans are born violent. You know, they're born ingrained to have violence. And
Right.
so, you know, we're brainwashed. I mean, 130 years of cinema, in my opinion, I've studied it for my whole life, is it's propagating war machine. And you know, it's propagating guns and it's propagating violence. And guess what? D.W. Griffith, who invented the feature film in America, said in 2024, which is next year, cinema will end warfare. He literally said that. And I'm like, good luck. Cinema,
Yeah.
you know, after you propagate it from, you know, from day one. Now, you know, there's a lot of debate in what I was saying, but I think, Daniel, what you've taught me a lot is this conditional versus relational, limits versus possibilities. So there's another one I want to throw in, and I skipped over it, but now I want to go back to it. Is this is a statement McLuhan said: everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. Now, I sort of interpret it this way, and it doesn't mean my interpretation is right, what he's saying. But if the child comes in from the cold and the parent goes, don't touch the stove, it will burn your hands. That's experience. If the parent goes, let me teach you the dynamics of heat, you can get really close to the stove, rub your hands together and get your hands warm. That's understanding. And what I feel he's saying is we are more dependent on experience to shape our behavior when indeed we should have understanding shaping our behavior more. Now there's a lot to distinguish between experience and understanding, but what's your take on that? Is that sort of what you're talking about when you're saying it's either limits or possibilities? You think experience and understanding can be in that polemic, like you were saying?
I think it's the latter part of what you were saying, where it's kind of the merging of those two, where experience can in some ways be merged with understanding,
Yes.
or, you know, or having an illumination, just like in your example of like the child who, you know, you either put your hand on the stove and you learn that it burns you, or you do the other thing and you teach someone, okay, you do this, and, you know, get your hands warm. I think like it's really in the latter example that those two things can merge, and it's about trying to, I think, you know, like the world is so abstract right now, right? It's like more abstract than maybe it's ever been. And it's because of technology, it's because of all these different tools and all these things going on. But that's why I think more than any time in our history, it's like the role of artists or the role of anyone, whatever you call it, whatever you want to call yourself, um, of being able to synthesize a lot of different fields, a lot of different information, and to use imagination and intuition as much as you use kind of didactic bumper sticker kind of messaging. Like
Yeah.
the more you kind of move away from that, the like I think the better that the world usually gets. At least historically, that's I would say definitive. I think we have a very difficult time though. Um, I mean, regardless of politics or whatever, I think just holistically, we have an incredibly difficult time being able to synthesize uh, experience into understanding.
Yeah. What was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch or guess?
I think um, I think the more that we understand what cave artists were doing was far more complex than we have ever understood before. I spent time in the caves of El Castillo 2 summers ago, where the oldest cave paintings are. But if anything, it's also kind of the birth of the cinema, which no
Yeah.
one talks about this, but there's a very interesting I made a short video about this, but there was a kind of proto cinema that you could say was developed in these caves as well, because these cave artists were essentially, well, of course, they were making the dots at the back of the painting and handprints and sketching out animals and all of that. Again, the more curious thing to me was in certain stalagmites, they would carve into them. So it had this incredible optical effect where as you walked in with a torch, you would see, in this case, basically a minotaur like walking the opposite direction. And this is like 40,000 years ago. So this is like literally, say 35,000 years before the minotaur is invented in Greek mythology. And so you have this there's this amazing kind of feeling that you get, or just this kind of weight of history where you understand oh, maybe this is something that yes, it's our invention as humans, the idea of minotaur, but it's also something that's always been with us. It's this kind of ancient link. And so anyways, I've been very curious about that, and about essentially what was that, I mean, just knowing that even exists, it changes the whole kind of feeling that you get from oh, yes, you go into a cave and you see a bison that's made with charcoal or something, but the idea of cinema, or the idea of walking into a space and having a mythical creature basically cross paths with you going the opposite direction because of you walking forward with a torch and the shadow moving away from you. I mean, that it totally conflates most understandings that we've had about ancient humans, but also Neanderthals.
Yeah. It's heavy. You saw Herzog's film Shadow of Forgotten Dreams?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
he talks about it as proto cinema too, and he got it from that great New Yorker article, the basis for his film. So it
Oh,
is,
really?
yeah, it's amazing how it all, it is, one of my favorite was, what was the motive of the cave artist? And the guy said, to keep people in the cave. Because, Harry Smith gave a lecture once. Have you ever studied Harry Smith at all?
No.
Check him out. There's a new book on him called Cosmic Scholar. And he's the ultimate, him and Jack Smith, are funny. They both have the same last name. But Harry Smith's there's a new book about him called Cosmic Scholar. And he said Bruno invented cinema, and it's basically the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep. And so you're dreaming collectively. So like Yoko Ono says, you dream a dream alone, it's a dream. You dream a dream with other people, it's reality. So people go in a big theater and all dream together with flickering light. They think it's real. I mean, Corlin Pandit had asked the best question: is television real? I just ask people that all the time. I'll ask you, Daniel, is television real?
I mean, I think it becomes real. I think it becomes real just in the same way that we were talking about earlier, that there's something, I think, more real in illusion than there is in reality for most people. And they have a very difficult time distinguishing that.
Yeah. My friend didn't grow up with television, and he went to college, and all these people were talking about people, and he goes, who are they? And he goes, well, they're not real people you're talking about, but we treat them like, oh no, they're real, so it's a funny question. It's like Lily Tomlin nailed it. She said, reality's a collective hunch.
That's great. I was just in Bangkok, and I saw the most, honestly, it's probably my favorite. It isn't even intended as being an artwork, but it's exactly on the nose with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's a temple called Wat Parawat. And Wat Parawat is essentially like this temple that these monks created that was kind of a way, like a leveling platform for thinking about like all these, mythological creatures and, Buddhas, of course, but then also intermixed with like what to our Western minds would be, like Pikachu and Captain America and Batman and all these other, they're deities of our time that are all intermixed in this amazing temple. And it gives you that sense of knowing that, like, this is really where we're headed, that, like, what flickers on a screen is probably more real in many ways than real people that even exist around us, and I think that it's an amazing lesson that I think most people should learn.
It's an amazing thing you just said, because it's two things. In San Francisco, there's a movie about it. They have a church that they worship John Coltrane. So they go to church and play train music. It's like, how spiritual could that be? And, Jean Rouch, the French documentarian and film theorist, said it best. He said, if I put a camera between me and you, it's more true than if there's no camera.
I couldn't agree anymore. Yeah.
It's an amazing statement, but it's hard, it's hard for people to think that, because they'll go, oh, there's a camera there. I mean, that's all people do now is exist with cameras. I mean, the big one is, I'm a dumpster driver. I go down alleys all the time. People don't know this. Lights turn on because of motion. They're motion sensitive. So it's like backwards. If criminals need lighting, all they do is walk where they want to break into something, and the lights go on for them. But now there is a voice that is movement activated now, and it is up and down alleys, and it goes like this: hello, you are currently being recorded. I mean, that's how the woman's voice actually says it. It's like, oh, really? People, I mean, that's a perfect example of a great experimental film. Can you say more words than that? And how long before the cycle goes, hello, you are currently being recorded again? So that's all. Is that all the words you can say?
Right.
Can you say any other words? Like, get the fuck out of my area. You're trying to steal something. No, it's like, well, why are you being kind? Hello. It's so amazing. And I hear it. I mean, not even in the morning. I know exactly every alley I drive by where the woman's voice comes from. you know.
That's wild. I haven't heard of that, but yeah, it sounds like, you know, some extension of like the Ring or something, you know, like please stop stealing my Amazon packages or, you know, something
Oh,
something.
is that another one?
No, I'm just making
Oh,
it
you
up,
mean
but
what is the Ring? I don't know what the Ring is.
like, you know, like people who have those doorbells that you know, they're big, like claim to fame is that, you know, like it's basically like always recording, or anytime there's anyone who comes up on your front step or whatever, it starts recording. So like you see what people do. Are they trying to break in? Are they trying to steal stuff? Or they, you
Oh,
know,
so
whatever.
you mean the Ring is like an app or a security system?
It's like a doorbell that like when but it basically just comes with like a camera that I
Right.
don't have one, but yeah, it essentially just
It's sort of
records
like
you.
a security system then.
Yeah,
It's some sort, yeah. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, we're learning all this stuff. Well, anyways, Daniel, it's been amazing. I only got through hardly a third of the questions, so I hope we could plan a part two, maybe 6 months down the line, and we could
Sure.
get into it more. I'll send you possible dates, and I really learned a lot. It was amazing, and we're also having a salon with a couple other artists where it's not just me and one other person. Doug Harvey and a couple other artists, and I'd like to invite you to that one too, because then you get a wider dialogue conversation going too.
Yeah, please. I'd love to continue the conversation both formally and informally. Your questions are great. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to learn more about you and what you're up to as well. Uh, can you tell me this? So is the interview that we just filmed? Are you editing it at all, or is it just
No,
like literally?
it's been live on YouTube, and as soon as I hit the end broadcast button, it will be on YouTube forever. So then I'll send
Okay.
you the link. I'll send you the link, or you can just go to the channel, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's up there. So yeah, I really
Okay.
appreciate it, Daniel. Thank you so much. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope we can keep talking forever and ever.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Yeah, thank you again, and let's be in touch.
Thanks, Daniel.
Bye.
Bye.